So I wanted to start a new series this evening on the Appamāṇa, or Appamāṇa, yeah, which are the four qualities of heart in Buddhist teachings. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm trying to calibrate how loud I need to be. They're more popular these days, referred to as the Brahmavihāras, which translates as Divine Abodes. But Appamāṇa in Pali, which is the language that these teachings are preserved in, means immeasurable or boundless states. And the Appamāṇas, the way I like to think of them, is their attitudes. And the Buddha said these are four attitudes that you can't have too much of in your mind. They can be limitless, they can be boundless. You can take this attitude towards absolutely everything you encounter. Everything you encounter in your own mind, everything you encounter in your own heart, everyone you encounter in your life, everyone you even imagine you might ever encounter. These attitudes are the way to move through the world if you want to be happy and at peace. Everything in Buddhist teachings is kind of it's a hypothesis offered gently. Try this, see if it works. The Buddha said, this worked for me, it might work for you. So these are held this way too. The Appamāṇas, the Brahmavihāras. The Buddha said these are attitudes that worked really well for him. I finally work really well for me. Maybe you will find the same. And they're fundamentally relational, right? An attitude has a relational quality. It's about how we relate to things. So it's not quite the same as a mood, right? You could just be angry. It doesn't always have an object, right? You could just be sad. But the Appamāṇas, it's a feeling about, right? It's a way of relating to. And the four Appamāṇas or Brahmavihāras are metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, celebrating others, or I think often translated as sympathetic joy, which I find a little awkward, and upekkha, or equanimity. And I'll give a quick overview of each of them, but tonight we're going to start with the last one, upekkha, and in the next three talks I'll move backwards through them. And I like to just switch it up like this because I find for those of us who've heard these teachings a lot of times, sometimes if you move through them backwards, you kind of get a fresh look at them. They land a little differently. But the quick overview, metta is a warm friendliness. It's the way it feels when you're happy to see someone. That feeling of like, it's good to see you. Hey. I felt it a lot of times walking in this room tonight, right? There are a lot of people here, some of whom I don't even know. Oh, I'm glad you're here, right? It's a nice feeling. It's a radiant warmth. And it turns out you can actually feel it for just about everything. You cultivate metta enough, and you can be happy to see the floor and the wall, right? You can be happy to imagine somebody living in Australia who you've never met, right? Metta it can touch everything. All of these can. Karuna is compassion. It's the ability to recognize pain or clenching or suffering, right? Something that's kind of knotted up and hurts, and just sort of feel the heart want to help it release, want to help it pass through. It's that feeling, it's like that almost good feeling of when somebody melts into you crying, right? And your body softens and just, I'm going to make a home for you here, right? I'm going to let that move through you, and I'm going to kind of hold you through that. That's that feeling of compassion. It's sort of a softening. Yeah, you can release here. It can be a little more precise too. I was thinking of taking splinters out of my children's feet, right? There's a little bit of a like, I got you. Like, we can do this, right? It's often very intimate compassion. Karuna brings us right up to somebody because they're letting us kind of come close to the thing that hurts. So it's intimate. It's sort of like a doula. You're like a pain doula or a dukkha doula, right? You're helping somebody sort of pass something through them. Mudita is like high five, good for you. It's that, yes, I'm really glad things are working out. And it's a relief feeling. So, oh, yay, my friends are happy and okay. My family's happy and okay. The world's happy and okay. Wouldn't it be nice if you open the paper and it said, things are fine? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, that's mudita, that feeling right there, right? And just, oh, yes, it's going to be okay. Whew, looked a little dicey there. And you can sort of see all those as qualities of the heart, right? That makes sense. We use the word heart, but they're attitudes. It's a way that we feel about things. And Upekkha sometimes can be a little funnier, like equanimity. That's a quality of the heart, just like flat still. But it's not quite like that. And so I wanted to start with it. And for those of you who read the email that introduced tonight's talk, I'm going to use that same example here to describe the way Upekkha feels. But it's like that feeling of somebody, when somebody brings you a problem, they want to tell you about a complicated issue in your life, and you're able to just sit there and listen. It's interesting. You're curious. You might hope that they figure it out, but you're not taking it on. I wonder how you're going to get through that. That's an interesting problem. And you might ask them questions. Oh, what's that part like? Oh, what's that part like? Oh, And it might seem kind of not warm, like metta, right? Not uplifting, like mudita, not this soft, receptive intimacy, like karuna. But if you've been on the receiving end of that, somebody who can just sit there and listen to you and ask some follow-up questions, it feels fabulous, right? It is actually a lovely thing to receive. Upekkha is a wonderful thing to have directed at you. All of these are. These are all things that feel really good on the receiving end. So it does have a heart quality. It is a valuable way and a freeing way to relate to things, right? And the Buddhist hypothesis is you can safely relate to everything inside and outside of you with Upekkha. There needs to be no limit. It is okay to be equanimous about everything. Curious, receptive, but not jumping in and getting involved, right? With your own fears and desires. Right? You can wish for it to be better. You can love it. You can care about it. But just holding. That's okay. Just being present. I see some of the questions bubbling up. I see you. We'll get to those. And Upekkha requires sort of a deep understanding and a faith, especially in relation to people, that everyone's mind is seeking happiness. Everyone's mind is trying to find a way to make this feel good, right? In some way or another. Everyone's trying to do their best. Everyone's navigating the same sort of fundamental laws of biology and social relations. And if you want to sort of lump that all together, karma, right? We're all living in the same world of rules and cause and effect. And so once you understand that at a very deep level, right? It's like walking in the forest and you see all the trees. They're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to get some light and draw up some nutrients and soak in some water. You can just be interested about how each of those trees is going about doing its thing. And it's the same with humans. And there's a way in which, right, when you walk through a forest, you're not trying to like stretch a tree up a little higher to get it close to the sunlight, right? You just notice. That's how it is for that one. But with people, you can sit there with them and help them explore these things. You can help them consider and make sense of and untangle some places that are confused. But you don't have to get involved. You can just be a presence. And it feels so good. And it is, in fact, so helpful to meet people with equanimity. And if you have that trust that their mind is trying to be liberated, that their mind is trying to be free, right? And that as they come to understand the way things work, they will naturally move towards happiness, freedom, kindness, love, all that good stuff. If you can really trust that, then it allows you to actually take that open, receptive posture without getting involved. Right? I think one thing that makes this easy, right, is I work as a psychotherapist. So I see 25 to 30 people a week in my office, right? And it helps just over and over and over and over again. You see how everybody's aiming at the same place. All these different minds that are configured in all these different ways are facing fundamentally the same challenges and aiming for the same stuff. And you can watch over time. The really fun part about having a client you've worked with 1, 3, 5 years is you can watch over time as people start to undo their knots and kind of get there. And the more you see that, the more you trust that everybody has this energy within them that's pushing them where they need to go. And so it makes it easier to sit back and just kind of hold the space for them rather than get in there and do it yourself. Because once you start to try to get involved, what you're actually bringing is your own fears and desires. You're wanting it to be different for them. You need to feel okay for it to be okay for them. Or you're afraid that if it's not okay for them, it's not going to be okay for you. Right? So all of a sudden, our own fears and desires have gotten tangled up in theirs. Right? And now the karma is all mixed together. Because if things don't go okay for them, then they're not going okay for me. But you told me to do that, and now it's my fault. Well, I mean, it's not my fault, right? We've gotten all tangled up. Because our fears and desires got commingled with their fears and desires, right? And we lost that quality of upekkha. Instead, what we want to do is just have them consider what their fears and desires are sort of tugging at, and which ones feel wholesome and which ones feel like they might not be. And the interesting thing is, when you sit with somebody with upekkha, with equanimity, it's contagious. Right? If you allow somebody to tell you about a problem and tell you that the hardest parts of it, the things that they most want that they're afraid of not getting, or the things that they're really terrified of, right? When you let them bring that into a space and you just listen to it, then they can look at their own fears and desires and be like, oh, look at this thing I really want that I've been afraid to say, or this thing that I've been sort of terrified of my whole life that I haven't really allowed myself to admit. And so then they start relating to their own inward world with upekkha, and that feels incredibly liberating. I'll give an example. Every now and then I get, clients with various types of intrusive thoughts, sort of the branch of sort of OCD that's really concerned with kind of mentally intrusive thoughts. And one particular type manifestation of this is, I think it's called harm OCD. But people basically have a thought when they're sitting in a room with somebody that they're going to grab a sharp object and stab them, right? And what happens is the mind becomes so afraid of this thought and afraid that it's real that there's another part of the mind that's trying to keep it from coming up. Can't have that thought. You can't have that thought. You can't have that thought. And the harder that you can't have that thought pushes, the harder that thought pushes back the other way, right? It might have started as some little impulse. We all have little thoughts that kind of pop in there, and you're like, ooh, that was a weird one, right? I call those the sex with your grandma thoughts, right? But if you just do that and kind of watch it flow through, it's fine. Like, there it goes. But once the mind starts pushing on it, oh man, then you get this really intense suffering that starts to build. And so you know what the cure for harm OCD is? You say, tell me how you're going to stab them. Let's watch the blood drip down in our minds. And you open up to it. And you just say, okay, tell me about that. What is the nature of that desire in your mind? Let's let it blossom. And now tell me why you are so afraid of having that thought. Oh, I feel like a horrible person. Right? And so now we've allowed this desire and this fear to be fully seen. And we just look at them. Oh, okay. Yeah, you really want to stab them in the eye, and you're really afraid that makes you feel like a horrible person. Okay. There it is. And the pressure starts to come out of the system. So that's the power of Upekkha. Right? It can really relieve these knots in the mind. And you can do that with just about everything. You don't have to have this extreme condition, right? It's a good one for using as an example. But all these places we're stuck in our life, if you really look at them closely, there's something you're afraid of happening if you go this way, and there's something you're afraid of happening if you go that way. And it kind of stays stuck in the balance. And often what you just need is somebody to help you kind of look at the whole thing in both directions and sit with it and feel it and notice what it's doing to the mind and body, this tension and this stress, and then you can kind of feel a way to move forward. So Upekkha is deeply healing. It also goes nicely with the sort of evolutionary biology perspective that's been, I think, increasingly woven into the fabric of our culture and how we talk about mental health and therapy and healing, right? That like all the things you think, all the things you do are the result of an evolutionary process that has been happening for millions of years, right? Our sexual desires, our greed, our jealousy, our capacity for deceit, right? Our habit of comparing. These are all things that developed because in one way or another, they were useful for survival, right? Now, some of them we don't need as much anymore. Some of them, I think we might think we need, or maybe we legitimately do, but we're a little embarrassed about, right? But Upekkha just says, let's just look at it, right? Let's just see what's in there, okay? And so it works nicely with that evolutionary biology perspective because you can just say, this is probably here for a reason, right? This is probably here because you learned this as a child, or your family taught you this way of being, or it's literally built into your DNA and your epigenetics. So like, let's just take a look without judgment. So Upekkha is also a cure for toxic shame, right? For low self-esteem, for fear, right? All these times when we look inside of ourselves and we say, I can't believe that's what's going on in here, right? Upekkha just says, let's just look at it. That's what's going on in here. Okay. Upekkha also comes with an understanding that it's actually really hard to totally get what's happening in someone else's mind. Going back to my, kids, it can be really easy for me to like accidentally impose how I see the world with the mind of a 43-year-old on how they see the world with the mind of a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, or a 2-year-old, right? But it's also true with other 43-year-olds who grew up in the same town as I did and went to the same high school as I did. We'll think we're talking about the same thing. Maybe we're talking about politics or music. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait, we're not quite. Like you actually have a different look at this or a different piece of information or a different perspective. And Upekkha says it's a protection against assuming that we think we know how someone's mind works. when I'm parenting, one thing we would say often to our kids when they were 2 or 3 is like, how would you feel if he did that to you? And they just look at me like, what? What? Right? Like that doesn't make sense. That's actually not a mental capacity they have yet. So that question does not compute, right? They just take the toy back and then run away. They're like, while you're asking me these crazy questions, I'm gonna get what I want and get out of here, right? It doesn't work. But we can do that to each other, right? We can think we're asking some question like, isn't this obvious? And the other person's looking at us like, I don't even understand the frame that you're bringing here. So we know that there's upekkha when we're curious, right? When instead of sort of telling how to think about it, how to look at it, what to do with it, we're like, what is that? Tell me what that's like for you, right? Or we're just sitting back and watching, right? That 5-10% of the breath, I've been doing trainings with other therapists lately, and we really talk about that as a foundational piece of the work. Because I find that if I can keep 5 or 10% of my breath while I'm listening to my clients, I notice that urge to like jump in and tell them something smart, right? Like all my fears and desires that want to get all tied up in theirs, right? I see them kind of jumping up. So that collectedness that we practice in meditation, it's also part of cultivating this upekkha, right? Because it helps us see all the ways in which we want to start grabbing and getting involved and getting tangled up in stuff. Because it'll just keep happening, right? That's how we do upekkha, is we actually watch our own fears and desires as they're bubbling up inside of us, right? That's how you cultivate this quality, is through inward attention and collectedness. Right? You can't just say, I'm going to be equanimous. That's not going to work, right? You actually have to watch these things as they're growing within you. Okay, just catching my place here. Kind of jumped around a little. And then Upekkha also makes room for some of the paradoxes, right? There's this way that what we want for ourselves, right? Even for those of you who are avid Buddhists, right? And you really buy the hypothesis, right? I do. I think most of what the Buddha said was spot on as far as I can tell. The hypotheses have worked for me, right? But that's a for me thing. And it's not the world would be great if I could impose these hypotheses on everybody else. It doesn't work like that, right? And this is one of the paradoxes of these teachings, is that it's just a for you thing. Right? We don't judge the weasel for stealing eggs or the mockingbird for imitating other birds so that it can, right? I don't even know why it does that, but it must have some reason that it does that. Right? Or the butterflies for putting big eyes on their wings to fool other things so they don't eat them, right? Nature lies and steals and cheats, right? And kills, right? So you might offer these teachings out there and say, anybody else want to take me up on this hypothesis? It could help you. But that's it. It's just a, hey, this is yours if you want it. But the world's going to keep doing what the world's going to keep doing. And so it's this funny balance between knowing inwardly how helpful something is for you and then outwardly allowing things to do as they do. And you actually start to appreciate that you got these teachings, right? That they landed in a way that you could receive them. Because even though these hypotheses and teachings have been around for 2,600 years, they clearly haven't landed for everyone. I was watching, anybody seen Hoppers, that kids movie? Anybody catch that one? No, not a lot of you going to the under 12 films. It is. So there's this one part of Hoppers where they're introducing the main character to this little animal world, and this guy's saying there are 3 rules here. Rule 1, don't be a stranger. Know your neighbor's names to prevent senseless anger, right? We got the metta working in there, right? And then all of a sudden, so he's saying hi to this fish, hey, Joe, and then to like a bear, like, hey, Larry. And he says, rule number 2, eat when you have to eat. And then the bear he just said hello to eats the fish that he just said hello to. He says, survival-driven feeding is acceptable. And then, as you're sort of reeling from that, he says, everyone's in it together. Look out for others in need. And he picks up a little mouse and like puts it back in its nest. And Upekkha's like that. Right? It's like, oh yeah, metta feels good. Loving people feels good. Taking care of people feels good. And there is something about being an animal, which we all are in a certain way, right? That has an innate kind of violence to it, right? These bodies are at war, right? You have cells fighting bacteria inside of you as we speak, right? 3 times I did the thing that is the worst for global warming. I brought 3 humans onto this planet. Best thing I ever did, right? But there's tremendous violence in that, right? And all the environment that we're trying to save is one big cauldron of violence, and sex, right? That's what's happening. And beauty and peace and love, but it's all mixed in there together. And I'll just finish actually with an exchange from Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was a Indian sage who lived in then Calcutta, was active in the 1970s. He's in the Vedic tradition. Is that right? No, Vedanta, sorry. The Advaita Vedanta branch of Hinduism. And he says, he's speaking sort of about realization. And he says, this is the end of yoga, to realize independence. All that happens in the mind, not to the source of I am. So what he means is, all these sort of stories you have about the world are kind of your own stories, but there's this quiet center that's untouched. And he says, once you realize that all happens by itself, call it destiny or the will of God or mere accident, you remain as witness only, understanding and enjoying, but not perturbed. And then his student says, if I cease trusting words altogether, what will be my condition? Like, I don't trust my mind, what's going to happen to me? And Nisargadatta Maharaj says, there's a season for trusting and distrusting. Let the seasons do their work. Why worry? So even your mind that is sometimes enlightened and sometimes isn't, is still following a pattern. So chill. And then the questioner says, sometimes I feel responsible for what happens around me, which I think was a question some of you had earlier. And Maharaj says, you are responsible only for what you can change. All you can change is your attitude. There lies your responsibility. And the questioner says, you are advising me to remain indifferent to the sorrows of others. And Maharaj says, it is not that you are indifferent. All the sufferings of mankind do not prevent you from enjoying your next meal. The witness is not indifferent. He is the fullness of understanding and compassion. Only as the witness can you help another. I'll let Maharaj finish the talk there. And appreciate your attentive listening. And happy to take any questions. Yes. Yeah. I'll repeat that last line. It was lovely. The questioner says, you're advising me to remain indifferent to the sorrows of others. And Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, it is not that you are indifferent. All the sufferings of mankind do not prevent you from enjoying your next meal. Think about that for a second. How many of you have enjoyed a meal since one of the many horrors of the world entered your inbox? Almost all of us. Right? You tasted something and thought, that's tasty. The witness is not indifferent. He is the fullness of understanding and compassion. Right? So there are these attitudes: equanimity, warmth, compassion. Right? They're all tied in this realization, this inner peace. And it is actually only from that place of deep equanimity that you can actually help someone else. Sure.
I have a question. Great
Please.
talk.
Yeah,
Maybe
thank you.
You need a TED situation. It's like mind blowing good. What is it about like our human condition that stops us from doing this?
It's a lack of awareness. Right? And that was what I was touching on, right? The cure for, or the way to Upekkha, the way to equanimity, is to become aware of what's happening inside us. So when you started to practice this evening, and as you've been practicing through your life, you are cultivating a capacity that we have to start to move towards this. So it's just whether or not there's awareness present, right? And cultivating these attitudes really catalyzes that process. And they kind of arise concurrently with it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Brahmavihāra is self-directed components. So I'm curious about that for Upekkha and whether building directed components sort of the same process that you just described.
Yeah. So the question was, you probably couldn't hear. The Brahmaviharas or Appamāṇa often have a self-directed component. Is it the same for equanimity? Is there a way in which you can direct equanimity inwardly, right, to yourself? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
So think about that that practice I do. Well, I'll give another example, right? Okay. I'm cooking dinner before I come here tonight, right? And one of my kids is asking me if they can have chocolate. Another one is crying in another room for a reason that I don't fully understand. One of them is screaming that he doesn't like anything I'm cooking, but then eating something I just made. And I'm watching in me this thing rising up into my neck, and I want to tell them all to shut up. That's the word that's coming up into my throat. And I'm not gonna lie, it's popped out before. But tonight I noticed it, and instead of squashing it down, I said, oh yeah, there that is. Of course. This is hard. And all of a sudden I became aware of how loud it was in my house and how jangled I was inside and how badly I wanted to stop feeling jangled. And that's the Upekkha. Like, oh, look at that. That's what's going on in here. Right? It has a quality of understanding, and that's okay. Right? That is a natural human thing to feel that way. And as soon as I could see what was happening and felt that was okay, and actually stopped fighting that urge to tell them all to shut up, I just stood there for a second, and then it started to subside, right? And I thought of the other desire I have, which is to be loving and kind and generous to my kids, right? And also to get dinner done so I could finish this talk, right? So it's really allowing all of those thoughts and feelings, right? You know, in the Jungian tradition, they call it shadow work, but it doesn't have to be so cryptic. It's just like let all this stuff in there blossom and just see what's going on in the mind and heart. Does that make sense? So that's how you direct it inwardly. You get really honest about what's happening inside of you. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you just answered this question, but I was wondering if you could offer some advice aside from watching things, or how to achieve this state. And I'm thinking particularly of moments where there's some sort of high activation, jealousy, or maybe excitement. If something good is happening, how can we find balance or these things?
Yeah, thank you. The question was, how do you find balance or equanimity in these moments that are hard, when you're feeling torn by jealousy or, yeah. So equanimity appears in 6 different conceptual frameworks in the Dharma. I won't get into all 6 of them. So its place in the Appamāṇa is only one. But one of the other places equanimity appears is as enlightenment, right? It is concurrent with the realization of Nibbana, produces the lived experience of complete equanimity, right? So that question gets to the heart of like how this whole thing works, right? Equanimity is the fruit of the whole practice, right? So if it's not coming right away all the time, that's okay.
And eventually it does start coming.
It starts coming, right? It's like a pump that you're pumping and pumping, and then there's a drip, and then there's a drip, and then there's more, and then there's sort of a torrent, right? It will start to suffuse your being. But everything you do, the meditations, when you're doing meditations, when you go on retreats, when you go to therapy, when you talk things out with people who are capable of holding them and helping you explore, all of that is contributing to equanimity. This is a life's work. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask the question that you've been waiting for us to ask, and I thought it was interesting that you referred to it twice, but didn't answer it in the talk, but seeded it as an expected question.
Yeah.
The moment where I felt the strongest urge to the question wasn't quite near the end when you were reading the dialogue, because I found myself really disagreeing with the statement, the only thing you can change is your attitude. It seems clear to me that you can change your attitude. There are other things you can change too, and in fact, it's really important to do those things, to act, not just to find equanimity. So I'm interested in your response. And I'll just add that I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's interested but a little hostile to Buddhism on the phone yesterday when I was sitting out in the park. And this was one of his main worries. So, you're just supposed to, everything is fine. You don't do anything. You just let fascism roll.
Yeah. Everybody get the question? Yeah. Online, you all get the question? Yeah, we got it. I'll start with my kids. Then we'll expand. If I had shouted at my children tonight, I would have changed things. They might even have gotten quiet, right? They would have been scared. They would have been surprised. I would have made a change. And I could have justified it. And in fact, I talked to a lot of parents who do. Maybe even I've justified it a couple times, right? They were being jerks. I had to shout. That needed to happen, right? Something had to change. But there's also a way in which when I went completely inwards and I said, what's going on inside of me? And I saw the rage and I saw the potential harm it would cause. And I saw that and I came down. And when I then looked at my kitchen with fresh eyes, I saw a totally different scene. I saw my sweet boy sitting there. It was easy to redirect him. I heard my daughter crying, but then I heard somebody walking over to figure out what was going on with her. The one who wanted chocolate, I said, sure, have some after dinner. Do. 9. 10 minutes later, they're sitting at the table, they're eating dinner. I'm working on this talk. It's fine. That clenching, that it has to change, that in and of itself is the beginning of some bad karma. That I can't take this, that if I don't do something, if I can't get out there in the streets and burn the mother down, like what you produce from that is part of the thing you're trying to get rid of. It doesn't work. The fourth stanza of the Dhammapada, right? Hatred does not cease by hatred, but through non-hatred or love alone does it cease. This is law eternal. You have to turn inward. And what you bring out to the world, even just your stillness, to go bear witness, right? To stand in the middle of fascism, racism, misogyny, ecological destruction, pick your thing. But to stand and bear witness, to calmly take it in and see it and look at it without flinching and try to understand it, that's incredibly transformative. That's not sitting on your rear end. That's bringing the deepest capacities of humanity to the most important problems. Buddhists see well. And so do contemplative Christians and, contemplative Muslims, anybody who trains this capacity. And I think there are a million ways to train this capacity, right? This is one program. But people who have this capacity trained in their minds can affect changes that very few other people can. They're the most powerful people. In the ancient teachings, the Buddha actually was, I don't know, did he tell this to people or did somebody tell this to him? But there was kind of this realization or this prophecy that he was either going to be a great leader and king or a great spiritual teacher, right? Because they emanate from some of the very same capacities. People who can see deeply into the nature of the human mind and their own minds can really move things. So that would be my answer to your friend, right? Start in here and then see what flows. Is that helpful?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think there's a question of, I don't know, I suppose one of the paradoxes in Buddhism is always these sort of, it seems to me, kind of theoretical total states that it seems to me never really quite want to reach, right? Like, I mean, one of them is where you don't change anything but your attitudes, right? But I think it's, I mean, I think, one way to put it is I think we're agreeing far more than disagreeing.
Yeah, let me put it another way. I think it's in your nature to do good. So I think you actually don't have to worry about it. If you change your attitude, you will do good. You will work against fascism, right? You will help people and love people and help old ladies carry their groceries across the street, right? And like stand up for somebody who's getting hurt. Nobody needs to tell you to do that or to fix that. That's already in your heart. And I think it's in everybody's heart. So like, you don't actually have to work on that part. That is built into humans. We are loving creatures, which is why Sri Nisargadatta is like, focus on your attitude, man. Once you fix that, the love is going to flow through you much more cleanly and effectively. Does that help kind of bridge the gap? Yeah. Yeah, back there. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Wow, we're at 8:22. Thank you, Ava. Last question.
So it's about your advice for balancing items what I would call practice or attempt at Upekkha and the fact that we are grasping at this. So I got into a terrible thing, right? So very bad. And I had this really terrible thought of something I wanted to say. And I observed it. I was watching my breathing. And I was like, well, that's a terrible thing to say. That's not even true. And then I was distracted for one moment, said something, and it came out. And I was watching the words come out. Oh, that just happened. I don't know how to conclude this question. like, there is we are these grasping animals, and like, it's a thing, and how, like, sometimes I feel like in trying, like, the mindfulness itself can be a sort of grasping. Don't be an animal. Don't be an animal. You have to be a Buddha, and you're not.
Yeah. But in telling that story just now, right, you brought equanimity to it. You brought compassion to it, because I can hear the quality of, like, I really wish I hadn't said that. That was hurtful, right? There was a kind of a meta in the room holding you, because I think we all have watched that. Like, it's almost like you're like cocking the chamber of like a gun, and you're like, oh, if I just cock it, then it won't go off, right? And, you look one, boom, right? So I think we've all been there. But in saying something, right, in this relational field, in the way that you just related to that experience internally and then related to it externally, you've loosened something in you, right? Like, that's the shift. You're bringing a different attitude. You're not sitting here in shame, beating yourself up over it, right? Like, kind of letting it freeze in place, right? We are animals and we do animal stuff, but every time we revisit our animal nature with an attitude of love and curiosity and equanimity and openness and allowance, we move towards this, right? It's a opening into it, it's a flowering into it. It's not a, like, flip on your equanimity switch, shove down the horrible thought. Let it blossom in your mind, right? And if it's really scary, like, So thank you. And I appreciate you sharing. Yeah, many blessings. All right, friends. Thank you all for your kind, loving presence and attention. One thing I like to do before I wrap up is to say that the Dharma is relational, and being here, we all received the gift, right? We received the gift of the Dharma, the meditations, the beautiful questions, the inquiry, the curiosity, the Buddhist teachings. But you also received each other's presence. And so in recognition of that, you might turn to somebody sitting next to you and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thought about that a lot.
Appreciate you being
So.